Hello and welcome. My name is Josh Singh. I'm your host of the Racial Healing Podcast. Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I started this podcast because I had to do something. I struggled for a long time to figure out what to do about racism. I've always been an ally. I've done my own work around overcoming my own pain and trauma around racism. And I've always known that that is not really enough. So I started this podcast for people to share their stories, to be heard, and for you, the listener, to witness those stories. And my hope is that we can all heal our hearts and our souls from listening and being part of this podcast together. So thank you for being here. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you enjoyed today's interview. So welcome to the Racial Healing Podcast. I am here today with Chris Rooney. Chris, great to have you here, my friend.
Thanks, Josh. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So we're in COVID times. We're all isolated and we can't be with each other in person, but thank goodness we've got Zoom. We could still talk to each other and see each other online. Yep. So, Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I mean, it is like month 5 or 6 now of quarantine, and here in Chicago, there's some crazy stuff happening in our city in downtown, and in spite of all that, like, you got to take stock of the fact, like, it's a summer day, the sun is shining, there's an opportunity to be positive in your outlook and the way you approach like life, and the opportunity to do something like this, which I think is really positive. Like, it gives me a good feeling. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, in spite of like the real problems that we're having in the city and this country, I don't know, I still feel good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, those first couple weeks of the quarantine, I was feeling grateful, excited, like I'm alive, I have work, I have a job, and then about week 3, I was like, holy shit, how am I going to do this? But it's just that ongoing struggle, and then we had the murder of George Floyd, and that just threw everything upside down. And then also, in some ways, was just more of the same, too. A lot of folks realizing this is more of the same, and other folks were thinking this is something totally new.
And it feels like this has been a time for people to really, like, be forced to sit with issues in society, and sit with issues, like, with themselves. And, like, there's nowhere to run to, right? Like, you can't just run to work. You can't just go exercise all the time and fill up our time. You got to sit with stuff now. And that's really interesting and insightful to me, and like, I think really revealing, but it's also super uncomfortable, right? For a lot of people to have to really sit and wrestle with these things that are not easy, not black and white at all.
Was that a pun there? Not black and white, Chris?
Well, not deliberate, but yeah, for sure. There is. I mean, there is a lot being revealed about the nature of race relations in this country, and even those, like, it's complex, man. It is not as simplistic as either side would like it to believe, I think.
What have you been noticing with people as they are confronting and really being forced to confront race relations in these last few months?
Yeah, it's like, I feel like there's a whole spectrum of responses. And I've spent, like, way more time on social media in the last several months than I had before. Like Facebook, Twitter. Like, I had a Twitter account, but I never used to look at it. Now I spend a lot of time on Twitter and just seeing what's happening. And I think there's just, like, this huge spectrum of responses from people saying, like, I don't see it, I don't hear it, doesn't exist, and my life is completely unaffected by this, and people that, like, will literally post pictures of butterflies, on their page, and talk about, the nature of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, and the wonderful nature around them, which is great and beautiful. But, like, people who just do not want to be impacted at all by what's happening in society. Mm-hmm. To other people that are, like, just really going all in and becoming really vibrant activists, not only on their Facebook page, but also in real life as well. And it's like, it's a to me, it's just a fascinating thing to see, where I've seen, certainly people, other black people in my community, like, we know and understand, and what happened to George Floyd was, like, shocking, but not necessarily surprising to us. Like, because myself or just about any Black person I know, we've all known someone that's had something really bad go down with a police officer. So like it's part of our history. What didn't feel that out of the ordinary. Whereas this other, this younger, newer population of people I just have seen that and been like, fuck that, right? That's wrong, and really getting really activated about it. And that's been kind of amazing and impressive for me to see people being just really charged up and active on social media and in real lives. I'm assuming it's okay to swear on this podcast too later.
Oh, yeah.
Let it out of the bag.
Bring it the fuck on, Chris. Come on.
Right. That's what I'm talking about.
So, what prompted you to be on social media more? Was it something around the uprisings and
Yeah, initially it was I had more time, and also I felt like I honestly was getting better information about what was happening on social media than what I was getting in the news. Right, I was getting more. Like when George Floyd protests were happening, seeing people go Facebook Live in the middle of protests helped me see like what's really happening.
Yes,
and it's a different story than what you're seeing in the media. And so I grew up in Minneapolis, so like I could see people as they're walking on the street. I'd be like, I know that street, I know where that is.
Wow.
Now I know what's happening. Whereas if I was just looking at the images on TV, it felt too foreign. Like I couldn't really understand what was happening, where it was in juxtaposition to everything else. So I was getting better information off of social media in large extents. And the other part of it as well, I think, I don't know, man, I'm certainly in a minority opinion about this, but I think like part of doing the work, the racial healing work that you're about and that I'm very interested in, a lot of that is just in like having some very like patient, drawn out with conversation with people you don't know on Facebook, who you have a common friend with, and you're brought together because you both have a contact in common, and just like you have very different opinions and you try to hash stuff out. Like to me, that's the work, and it's not. I don't always feel up to it every day, but I think it's something that's a really important part of like having a conversation and trying to understand somebody who's got a very different perspective from you.
Absolutely, yeah. I've had that go really well. I've had it go really poorly. A lot of it depends on that first exchange of like how the people approach each other. And of course,
have had those crash and burn in the past, and like get really frustrated, despondent after the fact. And like, why did I waste an hour doing that?
Right.
And then, like to me, like the next day, you got to flush it and come back and say, all right, like if I'm feeling good and strong internally again, then if there's an opportunity, I'm gonna try again. Not with that same person, but I'm gonna try again to just facilitate some conversation, and just if you get person to ask one question about their kind of worldview, then that's success. To me, that's huge success.
So have your personal relationships, whether with friends or family, colleagues, have those been impacted by what's happening of late in the world around race?
For sure, impacted, and it was very revealing. Like I think this time's been very revealing, and some things, perspectives that you may not have known about another person. Like it comes out because there's a third rail topic that's always it's just right there, and so it's really revealing that people have some very different perspectives about stuff. So for sure, friends, relatives, friends of friends that I've found that I've different perspectives from, and you got a choice about like, are you going to be okay with that or not? And most of the time I am. Like I've got there's a group of guys that I have a martial arts background and did boxing with it from perspective with, and I like I get to the point where I'm not going to have a deep political conversation with somebody I used to spar with. It's just like, that's not what we do. That's not the basis of our interaction with. And so, that's I understand your perspective. We're still gonna get down together, go to the gym, but that's not the guy I want to have like a deep intellectual conversation with. But other times, yeah, for sure. Like I try to have conversations in a vulnerable place with people that I know already and know me. Mm-hmm. So it's harder to be like, fuck you, because like you know me,
right?
And I'm of the opinion that, and again, I'm maybe in the minority on this. I'm really against the whole unfriending phenomenon. I think it's such an anxious time, and everyone's reaching and wants a little bit of power, a little bit of control over your life. And so just saying like, well, if you don't agree with me, unfriend me, or I'm unfriending you, gives you that little satisfaction of control. I think that's just super dangerous, right? Because when you stop having the ability to debate, to discuss, and you start othering the other side because you don't know anybody on the other side, right? And you say those people over there are all racist or immoral or unholy, and those people all there are all stupid and willing to be taken advantage of. And you don't know anybody on the other side. That's the first step in dehumanizing the other side, and that's when really bad stuff happens. So I'm at the standpoint, and again, it's a tricky area, but I don't unfriend anyone. I've been unfriended, but I don't. I want to keep all those opinions in my space, and I may mute some. Like some days, I just can't engage, but like I at least want to hear it. At least want to know what's out there.
Chris, I remember listening to you talk after you had gone up to Minneapolis, like a week or two after George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about what you saw and what you experienced there personally?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Minneapolis is my hometown where I grew up, and I went up there because what I was seeing on TV didn't look like my hometown. Like that didn't look right. And there were some pretty scary messages being sent out by local authorities about racist white supremacist group being in the area. My mother, who's African American, was home by herself at the time, and I was like, I got to get up there. Like I don't feel right. I felt that whole weekend. I felt like I don't know where I'm supposed to be, but I don't think I'm supposed to be here. And then I talked to my mother, and I heard some fear in her voice. I said, I got to get up there. And so I drove all night to get up there. And this was probably, so he was killed on Memorial Day, and I probably got up there. I got up there late Friday night, early Saturday morning. And most of the protest activity had been like the burned down burnings had already been burned, right? There wasn't any large scale protest activity. National Guard was still around. They weren't doing anything. They were probably more of a nuisance than anything else. They just were kind of like rolling down the street and making people nervous. And I was just really impressed by the way like the city just stepped up immediately and said, all right, we're going to make this right. We're going to clean up. And so the inhabitants of that neighborhood in South Minneapolis and a whole bunch of people from the suburbs like just came in, said, we're going to clean this stuff up. Crews were out in place, like demolishing the buildings that were burnt down. And the city council like was taking action immediately, saying like, all right, this shall not happen again. And here's the actions we're going to take to change the way we think about policing in our environment. So like, I'm super proud of the way Minneapolis just responded immediately in a very like loving, compassionate, and innovative way to try and reinvent the city. Reinvent the city from the ground up and involve all these different voices in that process. And the way the artist community like just really stepped up right away and started painting beautiful murals over all the boarded up buildings and boarded up businesses. Like just that felt really good and felt very representative of Minneapolis to me, because that was a very multicultural movement. It was blacks, it was whites, it was African immigrants, it was Indian, Minneapolis is a pretty super multicultural community, especially that neighborhood where George Floyd was killed is extremely diverse. And so seeing that diverse community step up and be like, this isn't okay, and this space is now sacred, and we're demanding this type of change was really good, and way different than the way it's depicted on TV. So there was some pretty serious destruction in Minneapolis over about 3 blocks. Like it's super concentrated right around the police precinct and those surrounding businesses. And then as you get further out from that, you have some broken glass, you have a lot of graffiti, but the media telling you that the entire city of Minneapolis has been destroyed, it's just not true. It's just really not true. So getting up there and seeing that in person was important to me.
And yeah, I want to ask a little bit more about your own background. You talked about growing up in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
What was it like to grow up there in terms of race? Was it fairly integrated where you lived, or more segregated?
Not really. So I identify as a black male. That's the box. If you're going to put me in a box, that's the box you put me in. If you want to ask another question about my background, I would say I'm biracial. In my experience, like most people don't care. They're just trying to get you into a box as soon as possible, so they can figure out what to do with you. People that I have people that I consider friends and have a relationship with know that I'm biracial, and that's a big part of my identity.
And you said your mom is black, correct?
My mom's black. My father's white. Yeah. Yeah. And so growing up in Minneapolis, my experience being black and being biracial is hugely influenced by the places that I was in. So I think my existence in Chicago is very different from what it was in Minneapolis. Very different from what it was in Madison, Wisconsin, where we spent some time as well. In Minneapolis, when I was growing up there in the 80s, it was very clear that I was not white, right? And just because of the way I look, I'm not white. And so there weren't, this was prior to there being a ton of other different types of nationalities, at least in the areas that I was in. So, if I wasn't not white, then I must be black. Minneapolis at that time was pretty segregated in the process of integrating more of their schools. And so, and as I went through that process of being part of schools that were more integrated, I was definitely I wasn't white, but then, being around more black students, black kids my age, well, they were like, well, we don't know what he is either, right? Because I didn't live in the same neighborhoods, they hadn't seen me around, I didn't dress the same way. So they're like, well, we don't know what this guy is either. He's not that. Don't push him over here. He's not one of us either. So my experience mostly growing up in Minneapolis was definitely one of being like an other, right? Somebody that didn't quite fit in, and not having necessarily anyone to go through that experience with, because I was an only child. So I knew I wasn't white. I knew I didn't quite fit in with black kids either. I just knew I was in another. So I would just, I wound up in school at the weird offs and cast offs table. Just the people that didn't fit, those are the guys that I fit with.
And has that remained in terms of who you prefer to spend time with? Or is there a certain group or constellation of people that you feel most comfortable being around?
Yeah, I think, so from my experience in going to college, I came to Chicagoland area to go to school. And my college experience, the school I went to wasn't huge, but not small either. So it was my opportunity to get to spend more time with other black kids my age than I probably ever had before. And really have more of an immersive experience in black culture at that point, and also be around more people that were biracial. That also had this balanced, nuanced view, because I wasn't, I went from being, one of a couple biracial people I knew to in college having 8 or 9 other biracial people I knew that were also kind of in this balanced place. So my identity as a black person, right, and part of black community probably got entrenched a bit more in college. The interesting thing as well, though, in being in Chicago, it's a very heavily Latin and Hispanic community as well. So outside of my college campus, if I just go into Chicago, most people assume that I'm Latin, that I'm Puerto Rican or Dominican. So it's again, the experience of people trying to put you into the box that's super comfortable for them as quickly as possible. But it's also just led to different appearances or experiences in the way I'm perceived here in Chicago. Because if I happen to be in Humboldt Park, absolutely everyone I'll come up to will speak to me in Spanish, and I'm good enough to get by, so that's usually a comfortable relationship for me.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for sharing that. I also identify as biracial and get coded in different ways, although neither of my parents are Black. My father's from India. And when I was in grad school, I participated in an organization called the Biracial Family Network. So it was a multiracial family. So you had some families where it was like two parents of different couples where each of the partners were different races, and then there was a lot of younger adults who were mixed race. And there's a couple of times we had parties, and there was a requirement to attend, and the requirement to attend was you have to be multiracial.
Really?
Yes. I'm getting emotional thinking about it because it's extremely rare that I'm in a group, really never. I think these are the only times I've ever experienced it, where I was with only multiracial people.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever had that experience. I've been in rooms where there were with other biracial people, but not where there were only other.
Yeah,
that would be an interesting experience.
It was mind blowing in a way. There's maybe 15, 20 people there, and I knew maybe 3 or 4 people, but each person I met, it just opened my heart up. Like, you're biracial, and you're biracial, and you're multiracial. Really, really a special time,
And it doesn't necessarily mean that all biracial people are the same or have common experiences, but there's probably a common thread you're going to find across all those people.
I mean, such different experiences based on how we look, where we grow up, who we're surrounded by, which parent we grow up with, or both. What culture we're exposed to. There's so many different factors that impact how a biracial person feels about themselves. Yeah. You had mentioned police interactions with police.
Yeah.
We have never talked about this, but just curious. Have you had interactions with police that have been difficult, scary, traumatizing?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I also recognize so many more have had so many more Black men have had really awful things happen to them at the hands of police. I'd say in Minneapolis, most often times, so I was, as a teenager, I drove beater cars. My first car I bought for $300. My second car I bought for $500. My third car I bought for $700. So it just kind of lets you know the type of cars I was driving. And I would get pulled over a lot for the typical, your license plate light isn't on, or there's a crack in your windshield, or your license plate's bent, can't see your tabs, which are all low level offenses, but mainly it's police officer really just saying boy, I don't really think you should be around here, not in that car, so I'm going to check you off. Mm-hmm. Right? So that was a pretty common part of my experience growing up. I do remember. One time I was driving my father's car, going to a dermatology appointment or something, and as a teenage kid, I did not often observe the speed limit. I was driving over the speed limit and got pulled over, and I remember the police officer pulled me over. And I don't know what sort of records he's able to pull from the DMV, but he had basically run the tabs on the car. And he said, well, this car is registered to, who's Ron Rooney? This car is registered to Ron Rooney, who's a white male. Who is that? Who is he? Who is he to you? Mm. Right? So even though my license I gave him said Rooney, he couldn't understand or refuse to believe that there was a relationship between me and this white man. So his natural assumption he went to is probably that I had stolen the car from this white man and was driving it when I shouldn't should not have been driving it. So like stuff like that. I also remember, going to a party with some friends. It's this stuff happens all the time everywhere in the United States. Like it's a teenage party. There's people drinking. It was in a minority area of town, and my friend and I left the party because I wasn't whatever girl I was trying to talk to that night wasn't giving me any attention, so I decided to leave. I'm out of here. I had a lot to drink, and we were just going to go into the car and just sit for a long talk. And later, I found out that apparently there was some kid who was at the party who had a disability and was out, like, I think he was out in the front yard, like playing with a knife or something. It's a disabled kid. And as my friend and I are walking back to the car, cop car comes by, then another one, then another one, then another one. And we're like, holy shit. And 15 cop cars pull up to this party and bust the house and shut the party down. You would have thought there was 50 guys with M16s at the party. Like, right. Apparently there's just one kid with a knife. They send 15 cop cars, and my friend and I were scared. Yeah. And so we get in my car. I'm too drunk to drive, and know that, but I'm like just terrified. So we get in the car, and I had a hatchback. We both crawled in the back of the hatchback, and let's just like cool out, like lay low here. And so we hung out in the back of the hatchback, and the cops started searching the surrounding block from the area from this car, and they spread out, and we could see them further down the line, like shining flashlights in each car. And finally they got to us, and they're like, shit. So they open up the car, they pull us out of the car, and I remember very clearly being pulled out of the car, and there's an officer with a shotgun pointed at us as we're coming out of the car, like at my forehead. And they ransacked the car, looking for whatever, and there's nothing there. And I'm like 17 years old, and the guy just pointed a shotgun at me. And it's just the type of stuff that happens all the time when you're in the other side of town, right? When you're in the wrong side of town. It's just like over-policing and over-aggression for what is pretty normalized teenage behavior, but just doesn't happen in certain sides of town. And it absolutely happens in the wrong side of town. Was it because I was black? I don't know so much. Like the guy I was with in the car was white, right? So it wasn't necessarily particularly racist, but it's absolutely classist. It's absolutely the assumption that kids on this side of town are up to no good, and if we get a call, we're responding in force.
Wow, Chris, that's really scary.
Yeah, I just had thought about that recently and done some healing around that to realize like that was just not okay. Like really, at the time as a 16-year-old, you get a little like, oh, well, that was kind of cool. That was kind of like a G.I. Joe moment. But looking back on it as an adult, it's like that was just really not okay for that 16, 17-year-old kid to have happen to him.
So at the time, it was cool. It's kind of a cool story to tell people. Like, oh, I was in the back of a car, this cop pulled me out. And much later, you realized it was really not acceptable.
And I remember, I was very scared. I was terrified at the time. And then the next day, you wake up and you're like, well, how can I resolve this experience? How can I, in a teenage way, come to terms with this experience? And most of the time, as teenage men, the way you're taught to resolve and deal with that sort of thing is buck up and okay, well that may be tough. Right. Now that happened to me, without really dealing with whoa, that was just super invasive and aggressive and threatening.
Yeah. What you said, you did some healing around it. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think just going back and revisiting that boy that I was and taking care of him a bit and allowing him to feel scared and allowing him to accept that just was not okay to happen to him. And so me as an adult being able to put my arm around that boy and said I'm going to protect you from stuff like that. And that what that happened wasn't okay, but I got you. I've got you.
That's beautiful.
So I'd say in Chicago, so I live in Oak Park now. Oak Park is a pretty diverse area. I like to say it is very like intentionally diverse. Like if you try to create it, if white people try to create a diverse community in a laboratory, it would look like Oak Park. It's like just enough diverse, not too much to make anyone uncomfortable. And I've had some experiences here as well. I recalled recently a woman I was dating 10 years ago. She had a very little dog, and the dog was in our backyard, and the dog slipped out from under the fence and was loose. And so I had just moved in the neighborhood, and I knew like I got to go find this dog. Like she's freaking out. My girlfriend's freaking out. I had to go find the dog. And so it was starting to become nighttime. The lights were getting low. And so I went out looking through the alleyway with a flashlight looking for this dog, calling out for the dog. Kaiser, come here. Kaiser, come here. And I know two things. I know I have to do this. Like me as my girlfriend, as the boyfriend, I have to go find the dog. I also know what's about to happen, right? That I am a black man with a flashlight walking around in the alleyway. And even though I'm yelling, clearly like yelling that I'm looking for a dog, Kaiser, I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, as I got up to the third block, there's a cop car that pulls up behind me, asked me what I'm doing, asked me where I live. And like, it was resolved in 5 minutes. I was like, look, dude, I'm looking for my girlfriend's dog. It wasn't that big of an encounter, but also let me know, like in this neighborhood, and again, I'm new, so nobody knew me in the neighborhood, but in this neighborhood, like I stand out and I'm irregular and not normalized.
Mm-hmm. So have you just kind of gotten accustomed to that and know that that's part of what life brings with being how you look, or is it something that makes you mad or sad?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think there's a big generational thing here because, so for me, I consider myself part of the Rodney King generation. Like that was one of the most formative events of my life that happened when I was a senior in high school, and I remember being so angry and upset after that video came out, and wanting to do something militant. And in my neighborhood, like there were no marches, there was nothing. There was no way to channel that rage other than like I just started wearing like really militant T-shirts to school, but there's no way to channel that, and so like it became normalized. And especially like when the verdict came out and all those cops were cleared, I was like, okay, I mean, this is what it means. Like this is what it means to be a black male in this space. Got it, right? And so it became pretty normalized in a way. And when I had when I was in college, one of my teammates, the person I played football with, was killed by the police in Chicago. This is pre-body cam, so there's no story, no way to know what actually happened that night. And I just know he was shot. And probably one of those things where like, maybe the cell phone was mistaken for a gun, or maybe he was a little bit aggressive or something like that. I just know he's dead. And that was another thing where it's like, okay, they got him. And this is what happens to us. This is the thing that just happens. And this younger generation, Generation Z, like God bless them, but they're like, fuck that. Right? That doesn't happen. Like that's not okay. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty like, it's inspiring and amazing to see because I had internalized and accepted a lot of that. And now I realize, yes. I've known it's not okay for a long time, but like now I know, like if I can get you and you and you and you and you and we all think it's not okay, and we're all willing to fight for this. Well, now we can do something. Now we can try to be more seen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What was your friend's name?
My friend who was killed. Yeah, Bobby Russ. Was killed back in probably 97. And there's still some he received a settlement, and that's what Chicago used to do with this. So it's like pre-cell phone, pre-social media, Chicago, like this, Bobby was not the first or the last of these. Like that's the way they handle these things. You paid off the family and you swept it under the rug. right? And so now with the advent of like the just pervasive recording and pervasive media, that doesn't happen anymore. But that was my experience growing up and like how that stuff was dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it still is. It still is. Now, I mean, families are getting a lot more money, I imagine, now that, you know, it's on camera, but it's still the way it's happening. I've seen it and my jaw dropped at how much money, how many millions of dollars the city of Chicago pays out to families of victims of police violence. It's
and nothing happens structurally,
right,
to prevent it in the future. Like nothing, other than maybe the only thing structurally that happens is you increase the budget for that line item next year because you just assume there's going to be more. Right? And it's just such an awful way to approach that. But again, like it's just part of what I came to accept, being a Chicagoan, that now you see, all right, there's a chance to not accept those things.
Mm-hmm. So Chris, before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts, ideas, anything that's on your heart or on your mind that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like this is doing the work to me. Like this is super important, and sharing topics that are uncomfortable with people that may not have the same opinion with you. And so like part of the reason why I agreed to or wanted to do this is, one, like I like just know and respect you a lot, but also I've been watching Joe Rogan Experience podcast recently. Mm-hmm. And I didn't I had no reason to like Joe Rogan. My perception of him was not particularly positive, but seeing what he does now, it's like the anti-Fear Factor. It's getting into depth, deep conversations about a range of topics with people that aren't necessarily famous, and just dialogue with people that are different, that have views that are not necessarily accepted. That's the work, man. To me, that's how you create some healing in this society. So just really honored and grateful to be part of it.
Cool. Chris Rooney, thank you for participating in the Racial Healing Podcast. So great to spend some time with you.
Yeah, likewise, Josh. Look forward to seeing this and more in the future.
Absolutely.